What if I told you the Templars were never truly born in 1119? What if that date, the one written neatly into history, was only a mask, hiding a story far older, far stranger, perhaps even eternal? 9 nights in Jerusalem, that's the tale you'll hear in the Chronicles. 9 men, poor in gold but rich in faith, who pledged their lives to guard pilgrims on the dangerous road to the holy city. But doesn't it feel too simple? You sense it too, don't you? That history rarely offers the truth in plain sight. There's always a shadow behind the light. And in this shadow, the Templars were not beginning something new. They were awakening something that had never died, the Temple of Solomon. The ground they chose for their headquarters was no accident. To the world it was rubble, broken stone, dust and memory. But to the knights, it was a vault, a sanctuary of secrets concealed beneath centuries of conquest and ruin. Why there? Why would men who claimed to serve Christ fix their eyes on the place of Solomon? Because maybe they weren't just Knights of the Cross, maybe they were guardians of something older, a covenant sealed long before Christianity. A thread that survived through silence, through bloodlines, through whispers passed from father to son. Picture them in the night, torches burning low, feet echoing on ancient steps as they descended into the earth. The city above asleep, but beneath the stones the past was stirring. Chambers where priests once walked, passages where treasures once rested, walls that still remembered the prayers of kings. Did they find relics, scrolls, the Ark itself? Or perhaps something less tangible? A knowledge so sacred it could not be spoken aloud. A wisdom that Solomon was said to hold, mystical geometry, the names of angels, the patterns of creation itself, knowledge that could make kings or unmake empires. And doesn't it make sense when you think of what followed, how a handful of unknown knights rose to become Europe's most feared and wealthy order, how their seal, their symbols, their architecture carried marks of something more than war, how silence became their true weapon. Maybe you felt this too, that strange pull when history feels incomplete, as if something vital was cut out, leaving only fragments. That is what the Templars embody. Not a beginning, but a return. A memory surfacing, a secret order reborn under a new name. So were they founded in 1119, or did they step out of the shadows, carrying a covenant the world had forgotten? The Chronicles give you one answer, but in the silence of the stones, another truth waits. And if this stirs something in you, if you feel that same hunger for what was hidden, join us on this journey, because the Templar story is only just beginning. What is it about certain places that makes them feel heavier than stone, as if the ground itself remembers and refuses to forget? For the Templars, that place was the Temple of Solomon, a ruin to some, but to them, the most sacred vault in the world. Not because of gold, not because of relics, but because of what had been sealed there, and what still lingered in silence. Picture it. Jerusalem, the city of light and fire, narrow streets winding through dust and prayer, pilgrims coming and going with weary feet, and there, high above them all, the Temple Mount. Once, it had been the dwelling place of God himself, or so the scriptures said, walls lined with cedar, altars burning with flame, the Ark of the Covenant resting in its inner chamber guarded by priests who whispered names too holy to speak aloud. Even in ruin, the ground radiated memory. Maybe you felt something like this yourself, walking through an old church, a battlefield, a place where the air itself feels charged. The Templars felt it too, and they knew this was no ordinary ruin. Why else choose this spot? 9 knights, sworn to protect pilgrims, had no need for chambers beneath the temple, yet this is where they stayed. And what did they do there? They dug for 9 years. They searched the shadows beneath the stones. Some say they sought treasure, but does treasure take 9 years to find? Or were they uncovering something far older, hidden in vaults and tunnels carved beneath the mount? Legends whisper of scrolls sealed away during the Babylonian conquest, writings filled with forbidden knowledge, geometry, astronomy, even the names of angels. Others believed the ark itself was buried there, still thrumming with divine fire, and perhaps the truth was something even stranger, a current of wisdom, an inheritance of silence, waiting to be awakened. This is why the temple mattered, not for its stones, but for the secrets it cradled, secrets powerful enough to outlive empires, secrets that could change the very shape of faith. And maybe you've felt this in your own life, in the sense that history has layers, and the surface is only the beginning. That's what the Templars must have felt, walking those ruins by torchlight. That, beneath the rubble, beneath the silence, something vast was breathing. The chronicles will tell you they were knights serving God, but perhaps they were servants of memory, guardians of a wisdom that refused to die. The Temple of Solomon mattered because it was not only a place, it was a key, a doorway, a mirror of the cosmos in stone, and the Templars believed, as many still do, that whoever held its secrets could reshape the world. So when they claimed those chambers as their home, they weren't choosing convenience, they were choosing destiny. And what they found there is where our story truly begins. Beneath every holy vow lies another promise, one not spoken aloud. The Templars swore to protect pilgrims. That is what history tells us. But history often hides the truth in plain sight. Think of it. 9 knights could never patrol the vast roads of the Holy Land. 9 knights could not protect thousands of travellers. And yet, they were praised as guardians. Why? Because their guardianship was never of flesh and blood. It was of secrets. Their true mission lay below, beneath the temple mount, beneath stone and shadow, where silence clings like dust. For 9 years they vanished into the earth. What were they doing down there? Not preaching, not fighting. Digging, searching, listening to walls that remembered what men had forgotten. Legends whisper they uncovered sealed chambers, vaults where priests once walked, tunnels where the echo of sacred chants still lingered. Some say they found relics, the ark itself thrumming with unspoken power. Others speak of scrolls, fragments of wisdom hidden when Babylon came with fire and chains, knowledge that could unravel the world if placed in the wrong hands. And maybe you felt this too, that strange pull toward the forbidden, the sense that truth is being held just out of reach. The Templars lived inside that tension every day, guardians of secrets too heavy for daylight. Their poverty, their humility, all a mask, a veil to hide the fact that they had touched something dangerous, and once touched, it cannot be untouched. Once known, it cannot be unknown. So they sealed their lips, oaths within oaths, not just vows to God, but vows to each other, to guard what they had found, even if it meant silence unto death. Think of that weight. 9 men holding truths that could shatter the church itself. 9 men walking among kings and popes, smiling politely, while carrying secrets in their very bones. Maybe that's why their eyes seemed older than their years, why their rise was so swift, so unstoppable, because their power was not only in arms or coin, it was in silence. The mission beneath the mission was never about pilgrims, it was about preserving what they unearthed. Knowledge sealed in stone, wisdom hidden in ruin, a covenant they could never speak of, but which guided their every step. And if this stirs something in you, if you feel the same shiver when you sense a truth being buried, then you already walk the same path as they did. Because some of us cannot ignore the whisper in the silence. We lean closer, we listen, and we begin to guard the secrets too. So the question is not only what they found beneath Solomon's temple, the question is, did they ever truly stop guarding it? 9. That is the number history gives us. 9 knights, poor in possessions but bound by something deeper than wealth. But tell me, why only 9? Why not an army if the Holy Land truly needed protection? Why not a brotherhood of dozens or hundreds? because the truth is simple and terrifying. Secrets are not entrusted to the many, they are carried by the few. 9 men could move quietly. 9 men could descend into chambers unseen. 9 men could swear oaths so fierce, so absolute, that no word would ever escape their lips. Have you ever felt that when something too precious, too fragile, can only be shared with a circle you trust completely? The Templars began as that circle, a fire hidden under ash, a brotherhood of silence. Their names are recorded, Hugh de Payens, Godfrey de Saint-Omer, and the rest, but their identities are less important than the number itself. 9 is no accident. 9 is a symbol, a number whispered in mysticism, in sacred texts, in the geometry of the heavens. 3 times 3, perfection folded upon itself. And maybe they knew this. Maybe they chose 9 not out of necessity, but as a sign, a covenant written not on parchment, but in mathematics, in mystery, in the very language of creation. What were they hiding? What could 9 men discover beneath the stones of Solomon's temple that required such secrecy? Perhaps relics, perhaps scrolls, perhaps a wisdom so vast that it could not be scattered among the unprepared. But it was not only what they found, it was what they became. 9 knights bound by silence, bound by a mission so concealed that even kings who later praised them never knew the whole truth. They were guardians not of pilgrims, but of something unspoken, something unearthed, something that still lingers in shadow. Imagine them at night, gathered by torchlight, hands clasped, words whispered in a vow deeper than blood. 9 men standing in ruins, knowing the weight of centuries pressed upon their shoulders, and knowing too that the fewer who bore it, the safer it would remain. This is why they were 9, not a weakness, a shield, a silence so complete it became their power. And maybe you've wondered this in your own life. Why are some truths kept only for a chosen few? Why does knowledge so often come sealed in whispers hidden from the many? It is because the many are not ready. The Templars knew this, and so they began, not as warriors of the cross, but as keepers of an inheritance they dared not reveal. 9. Not an accident, not a limitation, but a design, a sign, a covenant. And from those 9 sparks there would rise a fire that no kingdom could control. They say history is written on parchment, but sometimes it is buried in silence. Beneath the Temple of Solomon, whispers tell of scrolls. Scrolls sealed away when invaders came with fire and chains. Scrolls too sacred, too dangerous to be left in the open hands of conquerors. What knowledge did they hold? No one dares to say with certainty. But legends. Legends are harder to silence. Some speak of texts written in Solomon's own time. Words describing sacred geometry, the patterns of creation itself. Others suggest writings older still, fragments from before the flood, carried by survivors who refused to let the memory of the ancient world die. And isn't it strange? 9 knights spend 9 years in the ruins, yet no record tells us what they unearthed. Their silence is louder than any confession, for silence, when guarded so fiercely, usually means something was found. Picture it. The torchlight flickering against stone walls, dust rising from the earth as iron scrapes against forgotten chambers, hands trembling as ancient scrolls are lifted from the dark, their ink faint, their words veiled but alive. Can you see it? Can you feel it? If they did uncover these writings, they could never share them openly. What king would permit knowledge that undermined his throne? What pope would bless teachings that suggested wisdom beyond the church's grasp? Such scrolls would be branded heresy before the ink was even read. But among the 9, in whispers and rituals, the knowledge could live. And this is how secrets move through time, not in books on shelves, but in symbols, in architecture, in coded language hidden in plain sight. Maybe you've sensed it yourself walking into a cathedral built by their successors. The angles, the arches, the light falling in precise lines. These are not accidents, they are echoes of something older, perhaps even the teachings carried from those lost scrolls. And what did the scrolls say of humanity, of God, of the stars? We may never know fully, but the very possibility explains the rise of the Templars, from 9 men to the most powerful order in Europe, from obscurity to legend. Because power does not come only from sword or coin, it comes from knowing something others do not, and the Templars may have known more than anyone dared to imagine. So when you hear of their beginnings, do not picture knights patrolling dusty roads. Picture guardians of texts, guardians of memory, standing in silence over truths too vast for daylight. And perhaps those scrolls still exist, hidden, guarded, waiting for the moment when the world is ready to hear their voice again. What if kings were not chosen by crown or conquest, but by blood? What if behind every throne there ran a hidden river flowing from Solomon himself? The Templars knew this story, or perhaps they carried it. Whispers of a lineage that did not die with the fall of Jerusalem, whispers that Solomon's blood continued, hidden through exile, veiled by marriage, protected by silence, a line of wisdom, surviving where empires crumbled. And here is where the mystery deepens. In medieval Europe, kings claimed descent from David, from Solomon, from the sacred line itself. Why? Because blood gave more than legitimacy. It gave destiny. Have you ever noticed how certain rulers seemed untouchable? How power clung to them like an unseen mantle? Perhaps it was not only politics. Perhaps it was memory in the blood. The Templars, some believe, were tied to this lineage. Not only knights, but guardians of the bloodline, protectors of heirs whose very existence threatened the church's monopoly on truth. Imagine it. Scrolls unearthed beneath the temple, texts that revealed genealogies long concealed, proof that sacred blood had not vanished but flowed quietly through medieval veins, proof that kings of France or rulers in the Holy Land carried Solomon's inheritance within them. If this is true, then the Templars were not simply warriors of Christendom, they were keepers of a secret so dangerous it could shake both throne and altar, a truth that kings might kill for, a truth the church would burn to ashes. And maybe you felt this too. That sense when you read history that someone is always missing from the story, that gaps are not accidents, that erasures are intentional. Could it be that the erased names belong to those tied by blood to Solomon himself? Think of the symbols the Templars carried. 2 riders on 1 horse, the cross upon a red field, signs of duality, of hidden meanings layered in plain sight. Perhaps even hints of a double lineage, one public, one veiled. And isn't it curious how fiercely the church later turned against them? Could it be because they held proof that holiness did not reside only in Rome? That divine authority could flow through bloodlines older, deeper, and beyond papal control. This is the heart of the bloodline theories, that the Templars guarded not only relics or scrolls, but living heirs, children and descendants who embodied the covenant of Solomon. Flesh and blood reminders that power is not always chosen, sometimes it is inherited. And if that were true, then the Templar silence was not simply loyalty, it was survival. Because to reveal such a lineage would be to ignite a war, not a war of swords, but a war of memory, of who we truly are and who has the right to rule. So perhaps the question is not whether the bloodline existed, the question is, does it still? Some vows are spoken before witnesses, others are whispered only in the silence of stone. The Templars swore their loyalty to Christ. That is what the Chronicles tell us. But what if their true oath reached further back, beyond the church, beyond Rome, back to Solomon himself? Imagine this, 9 knights kneeling, not before a pope, but before memory itself, swearing allegiance to an ancient covenant, one older than the cross, older than the altar, older even than the name Templar. Could it be that what bound them was not the blessing of the church, but the echo of oaths sealed in Jerusalem centuries before? The Temple of Solomon was not just stone and cedar, It was the meeting place of heaven and earth, a dwelling for the ark, a house of covenant, and covenant once made cannot be broken. Maybe you felt this too, the sense that promises once spoken linger in a place, that a vow clings to walls long after voices fall silent. What if the Templars walked into that same memory and continued a vow first spoken by priests and kings of old? The Church said they were servants of Christ. But what if they were servants of a deeper lineage, bound not to pope or priest, but to an unbroken thread stretching back to Solomon's throne? Think of the secrecy that surrounded them. Think of their rituals, their silence, their refusal to reveal the heart of their order even under torture. That kind of silence does not come from recent invention. It comes from something older, something sacred, something too dangerous to be spoken aloud. Perhaps they called it wisdom. Perhaps they called it covenant. Whatever it was, it shaped them more than any sword, more than any treasure. Picture them gathering at night, torches flickering, words exchanged in a language the world had forgotten, hands pressed to stone as if stone itself bore witness, a vow renewed, not begun. And maybe this is why their rise was unstoppable, because they were not starting from nothing, they were inheriting, carrying forward an oath that stretched back to the very foundations of the temple. The Church thought it commanded them, but perhaps the Church was only a cloak, a convenient cover for something far older. So when you think of the Templars, don't picture men forged by Rome, picture men forged by covenant, silent heirs to an oath the world had tried to erase. And ask yourself this: if their vow truly predated Christianity, then who or what were they really serving? Wisdom is not the same as knowledge. Knowledge fills the mind, but wisdom transforms the soul. Solomon was said to be the wisest of kings, but his wisdom was not just in judgment or governance. It was arcane, mystical, a vision of the world as a living tapestry of hidden patterns. The Templars, some believe, sought more than relics beneath the temple. They sought this wisdom, not gold, not jewels, but the unspoken teaching Solomon himself was said to guard. Imagine the kind of wisdom that could summon angels with a name, that could draw down fire with a word, that could inscribe the geometry of the heavens into stone. The kind of wisdom whispered in shadows, passed not to the many but to the chosen few. And maybe you felt the edge of this mystery yourself. That strange moment when coincidence feels like design, when numbers, shapes, or stars seem to align too perfectly. As though the universe itself is speaking a language just beyond your grasp. That is the language Solomon was said to know. The Templars carried fragments of it, or so the legends tell us. Sacred geometry carved into their churches, symbols layered into their seals, patterns that spoke of balance, of harmony, of a power hidden in plain sight. But here is the danger. Wisdom like this threatens empires, for if men can know God directly through numbers and stars, if the cosmos itself can reveal truth without the priest, then what becomes of the Church? What becomes of Rome's authority? This is why the whispers of Solomon's wisdom are always veiled, why they come to us through symbols and silence, never through open words. Because to reveal too much is to invite fire. Picture a Templar knight standing in a chapel of his own order, sunlight piercing through stained glass, falling at precise angles onto stone. His lips move, not in prayer to saints, but in recitation of numbers, ratios, formulas, echoes of Solomon's own secrets. To an outsider, he is only praying. But to those who know, he is unlocking the universe. And maybe this is why the Templars seemed untouchable for so long. Because their strength was not only in swords or wealth, it was in knowing how to align themselves with the hidden laws of creation, to move not against the grain, but with it, to stand in harmony with a design older than any kingdom. Solomon's wisdom did not die with him. It survived in fragments, in whispers, in men bold enough to protect it, even in the face of fire and chains. And if the Templars truly carried this wisdom, then perhaps their downfall was never about heresy. Perhaps it was about fear. Fear of what men could become if they remembered the truth Solomon once held. So the question remains, was their wisdom destroyed with them, or has it been waiting quietly for us to listen again? Some relics inspire devotion, others inspire fear. The Ark of the Covenant was both. A chest of acacia wood gilded in gold, carried on the shoulders of priests, crowned with the wings of cherubim, said to hold the tablets of the law, the rod of Aaron, and a vessel of manna. But more than that, it was said to hold the very presence of God, a fire that could bless or destroy, a light so fierce it could topple walls, strike men dead, or make nations tremble. And here is where the Templar mystery deepens. For where was the Ark after the temple fell? Scripture is silent, history looks away, but legend refuses to forget. Whispers say it was hidden, concealed beneath the very stones where the Templars made their home, sealed away until the time was right. And when 9 knights entered those ruins, they did not enter empty-handed. They entered with a purpose. Imagine them, torchlight flickering against stone walls, the air heavy with dust and silence. And then, a chamber, a chest, a relic that hummed with an energy no man could mistake. If they found it, even for a moment, they would never speak of it. Why? Because the Ark was not just treasure, it was power, uncontrollable, unstoppable. And maybe you felt it in your own way, that sense that some truths are too vast, too raw to be spoken aloud, that to even touch them is to risk being consumed. That is what the Ark represented. The Church claimed to be the keeper of God's presence. But if the Templars held the Ark, then who truly carried that power? Rome, or 9 silent knights beneath the temple? Think of what it would mean to march into battle with the Ark at your side, to stand before kings knowing you carried what even priests dared not touch. It would explain their rise, their untouchable aura, their almost mythical authority. But perhaps the Ark was never meant to be wielded. Perhaps it was meant only to be guarded. And the Templars, bound by covenant, became those guardians, not conquerors, but keepers, protectors of a fire that could never be allowed to fall into the wrong hands. The chronicles fall silent here, and silence is often the loudest clue of all, so we are left to wonder. Did the Templars find the Ark of the Covenant? Did they carry it away, hidden under cloak and night? Or is it still there, buried beneath the ruins, waiting for those brave or foolish enough to seek it? One thing is certain, whether relic or legend, the Ark became part of their story, a reminder that some treasures are not meant to be owned, only guarded, only feared, only remembered in whispers. And perhaps, even now, its fire still waits in silence. Some truths are not forbidden because they are false, but because they are too powerful. The Templars, it is said, uncovered more than relics in Jerusalem. They uncovered knowledge the Church could never allow in the open. Think of alchemy, not the crude dream of turning lead into gold, but the sacred art of transformation, the belief that matter and spirit mirrored one another, that what could be purified in fire could be purified in the soul. Imagine knights who were more than warriors, knights who studied hidden texts by candlelight, knights who believed the human body, the human spirit could be transmuted into something higher. Isn't that more dangerous than any sword? And then there was geometry, not the geometry of chalkboards, but the geometry of God. Circles, triangles, proportions that echoed the very structure of the cosmos. The kind of knowledge Solomon himself was said to weave into the temple. Step into a Templar church and you'll see it. The way the arches curve, the way the light falls at precise angles. It is more than beauty. It is a code, a map of heaven written in stone. Why would the church fear this? Because knowledge like this bypassed its priests. You didn't need papal blessing to glimpse the divine. You only needed to look at the stars, at the shapes of creation itself. And maybe you felt this too. that subtle sense that the world is speaking, that numbers, symbols, patterns are not coincidences, but whispers of something deeper. The Templars felt it too, and they built their lives upon it. But hidden knowledge has always been dangerous. It threatens kings, it threatens empires, it threatens anyone who rules by fear and ignorance. So the Templars concealed it, in symbols carved into stone, in rituals whispered behind closed doors, in silence so deep it cannot be broken, even under torture. This was their true treasure, not gold, not relics, but wisdom too vast for daylight, wisdom that suggested humanity was capable of far more than the Church dared to teach. And doesn't that explain everything? Their meteoric rise, their untouchable presence, their eventual destruction, because the Church could tolerate wealth, but never wisdom it could not control. So when you think of the Templars, don't picture only knights with swords, picture seekers of hidden laws, men who believed the world was alive with sacred patterns, men who touched truths the rest of us only glimpse in dreams. And perhaps those truths are still with us, in the quiet of old cathedrals, in the ratio of stone to shadow, in the silence between numbers. The question is, are we ready to see them? Power always draws watchful eyes, and the Templars, though small in number, began to shine too brightly, too quickly. The Vatican had welcomed them at first, 9 knights, humble and poor, sworn to protect pilgrims in the Holy Land, a noble cause, a holy mission, safe enough, or so it seemed. But soon, questions rose. How could 9 knights survive with no wealth, no land, no visible support? How could their influence spread so far, so fast? Who, exactly, stood behind them? In whispers, unease stirred. Did the Templars truly serve Rome, or did they serve something else, something hidden, something older? The Vatican watched closely. It could not ignore the favour the Templars seemed to carry, as if unseen hands were guiding them. Donations poured in, patrons aligned with them, kings opened doors, and the Pope himself granted privileges almost unheard of. Why? Was it trust, or was it fear? Maybe you've noticed this in life too, when someone rises so suddenly that it feels unnatural, as if destiny itself is pulling them upward. That's how the Templars must have appeared, not simply lucky, but chosen. And that unsettled Rome, because power in Christendom was supposed to flow through the Vatican, through Pope and priest, through altar and sacrament. But here was a new force. Loyal, yes, but only up to a point, independent, untouchable, bound by secrets that even the Pope could not pierce. Whispers grew louder. What did they find beneath the Temple of Solomon? Why did their oaths seem heavier than the ones sworn to Rome? Why did their silence carry the weight of something concealed? Allies smiled in daylight, but suspicion bloomed in shadow. The Church welcomed their victories, but worried about their mysteries. Every gift of land, every new recruit, every favour granted made the Vatican wonder, were the Templars servants of Christ, or guardians of something Christendom was not meant to see? And maybe this is the heart of all suspicion. We fear most not what is spoken, but what is withheld. The Vatican could not control what it could not name. And so, beneath its blessing, a quiet unease began to grow. The Templars had aligned themselves with the Church, but the Church could feel it, that their true alliance was with something older, deeper, sealed in silence. And that tension between blessing and suspicion would only grow sharper, until one day it would ignite into betrayal. Silence can be louder than any word. The Templars understood this better than anyone. They rose not by shouting their truths, but by concealing them. Every vow they swore, every ritual they performed was wrapped in secrecy, and it was that secrecy that became their shield. Think of it. An army may be defeated, a fortress may fall, but a secret, once sealed in silence, cannot be conquered. The Templars spoke little of their true mission. To the outside world they were protectors of pilgrims, servants of God. But behind closed doors, their words grew careful. Their symbols grew layered, their knowledge passed only from one brother to another, hidden in oaths and shadows. Have you ever held something so precious you dared not share it even with those closest to you? That is the weight they carried. The more dangerous the secret, the deeper their silence became. And they learned how to cloak truths in symbols, crosses, circles, numbers, geometric patterns carved into stone, marks that looked harmless to outsiders, but whispered volumes to those who knew how to read them. This was their language, a code that survived even when words could not. Picture a knight kneeling in a dim chapel. On the wall, a carving of two riders on one horse. To the pilgrim, it means poverty, humility, but to the initiated, it means duality, the hidden and the revealed, the surface and the secret, light and shadow woven into one. This is how they protected themselves, not only with armor and blade, but with silence and symbol. Even if captured, even if tortured, a brother could reveal nothing. For much of what they guarded was not spoken at all. It was lived, encoded in the way they built, the way they prayed, the way they moved through the world. And maybe you've sensed this too, that certain truths do not need to be said outright, that a glance, a sign, a pattern can carry more meaning than 1,000 words. The Templars built their order on that same intuition. The power of secrecy was not in hiding from enemies. It was in safeguarding something so sacred it could never survive the noise of open speech. By silence they preserved it, by symbols they carried it forward, and this is why their influence outlasted their own destruction. For even when the church tried to erase them, their silence spoke louder than accusations. Their symbols endured, etched into cathedrals, carried into new brotherhoods, woven into the fabric of history. Their power was never only in wealth or steel, it was in secrecy, a silence that still lingers, a language still waiting to be understood, and perhaps even now those symbols surround us, hidden in plain sight, waiting for eyes ready to see. Lift your eyes to the night sky, and you see what Solomon once saw, not just stars, but a map, a mirror of the heavens, guiding kings and shaping empires. The ancients believed the cosmos was not distant. It was intimate, alive. Its rhythms pulsed through the earth, through the body, through the rise and fall of nations. To read the stars was to read destiny. Solomon, it is said, was a master of this art. His wisdom was not only in judgment or wealth, but in knowing how the heavens moved, how patterns above reflected truths below, how power could be aligned with the very order of creation. And the Templars, bound to his legacy, may have carried fragments of that knowledge. Look closer at the places they built, their chapels, their fortresses, their sacred halls. Many aligned not at random, but with the stars, light falling through windows at precise moments of the year, stone archways framing celestial paths, as if each building was a clock, a compass, a bridge between heaven and earth. Why would knights care for such things? Because they were not only warriors, they were seekers. Guardians of wisdom that whispered the divine was not confined to churches, but written across the night sky itself. And maybe you felt this too, that quiet awe beneath the stars, the sense that you are small, and yet woven into something infinite. The Templars must have felt it as well, only they believed the stars did more than inspire. They guided, they instructed, they revealed, to rule with justice, to build with harmony, to pray with power. Solomon looked upward, and so did they. Every constellation a scripture, every planet a messenger, every cycle a reminder that nothing on earth stands apart from heaven's design. This, perhaps, was the real threat to Rome. For if men could read the stars as scripture, who needed priests? If wisdom shone in the sky itself, who needed the church to mediate truth? Astronomy was not heresy, it was liberation. And so the Templars held it close, not shouted from pulpits, not written openly in books, but whispered, symbol by symbol, stone by stone. They watched the heavens, and they built their lives in rhythm with its song. Think of it, knights riding beneath starlit skies, guided by more than compass or road. Templar chapels where light fell on sacred marks only on solstice dawn. Silent prayers spoken beneath constellations that had been traced since Solomon's day. This was their astronomy, not science as we name it now, but sacred alignment, a way of remembering that heaven and earth were not two, but one. And perhaps that is the greatest wisdom of all, that if you wish to know your place in the world, you need only look upward. For the stars still speak, just as they did to Solomon, just as they did to the Templars. Stone remembers what men forget, and the Templars knew how to speak to stone. They were knights, yes, but also builders. Every fortress, every chapel, every hall they raised was more than shelter. It was scripture in stone, a message hidden in arches and pillars, a wisdom carved where only the patient could see. Why? Because building was more than craft. It was tradition, it was legacy, it was the language of those who came before. The builder's tradition stretched back into the mists, to Solomon's temple, to masons who worked not with tools alone, but with knowledge passed in silence, ratios, measures, harmonies that reflected the cosmos. For them, architecture was not construction, it was creation. The Templars inherited this, or perhaps they rediscovered it in the ruins of Jerusalem. And when they built in Europe, they built with the same sacred codes. Walk into a Templar church and pause. Notice the circle and the square woven together. Notice the arches that rise not only for strength but for beauty. Notice how light itself seems part of the design, falling at exact moments, exact places. These were not accidents, they were echoes of a knowledge older than Christendom itself. And maybe you felt this too, that sense when you step into an ancient building and something inside you stirs, as if the stones themselves are humming with memory. That is the builder's tradition at work. It is not only seen, it is felt. For geometry is not only numbers, it is harmony. The circle speaks of eternity, the triangle of balance, the spiral of growth and rebirth, each shape a whisper of divine truth. And in stone, these whispers became immortal. This is why the Templars built with such precision. Their chapels were not vast, but they were perfect. Their fortresses not merely strong, but aligned, every measure a prayer, every proportion a vow. And think of the masons who worked beside them, men bound not by parchment, but by silence, passing their knowledge from hand to hand, generation to generation. This was their true fellowship. Not written laws, but living tradition. The church feared heresy in words, but how do you condemn a wall? How do you burn a cathedral? The secrets carved into stone could not be erased, and so, long after the Templars fell, their builders' wisdom lived on, quiet, patient, waiting. Perhaps that is why so many today still feel drawn to Gothic arches, to rose windows, to towers that seem to touch the sky, because deep within we recognize the code. The builder's tradition speaks to something ancient in us, something that longs for order, beauty, eternity. The Templars knew this, and through stone they left a message the world could not silence, a message still standing, still speaking, for those with eyes to see. Not all maps are drawn to be read, some are drawn to be hidden. The Templars guarded more than relics and wisdom. They guarded routes, paths carved across land and sea, marked in symbols only they could understand. Why? Because their mission stretched far beyond what the world was told. Pilgrims needed protection, yes, but so did secrets, and secrets must move, just as men do. Scrolls, relics, knowledge, none of it could remain in one place. It had to be carried, concealed, passed from hand to hand. So the Templars built maps, not the kind you or I might unroll on a table. These were coded, hidden in carvings, in tapestries, in stained glass, lines that looked like decoration, but pointed to rivers, mountains, vaults, stars traced across a ceiling that mirrored routes across the earth. Imagine it. A knight standing in a chapel, gazing at a pattern of tiles on the floor, to most only beauty, To him, a chart, a guide, a direction towards something the world was not meant to see. And maybe you felt this before, the sense that some patterns, some symbols are speaking just beyond your reach. The Templars lived by that language. It was their compass, their protection, their silence given form. Some legends say their maps stretched across continents, from Jerusalem to Ethiopia, from France to Britain, from the old world to shores we were told had not yet been discovered. Is it possible? If anyone could have known, it was them. And what did these hidden routes protect? Perhaps relics, like the Ark, or fragments of the true cross. Perhaps scrolls filled with unspoken names. Or perhaps bloodlines, families whose existence could unravel the power of kings. The church held the world in parchment and decree, but the Templars held it in silence and maps. Invisible highways only they could walk, and in those routes they carried something no pope could touch. Think of the fear this would stir, men who moved unseen, men who carried treasures without leaving a trace, men who could vanish into a symbol on a wall only to reappear in a fortress across the sea. It makes sense, doesn't it? Their power was not only wealth or sword, it was knowing the roads the world could not see, guarding the paths where memory itself travelled. And even now perhaps those maps endure, carved into forgotten chapels, hidden in manuscripts dismissed as decoration, waiting for someone who knows how to read the silence. The Templars' maps were never about geography, they were about guardianship, a way of protecting truths so dangerous they could only move in shadow. And maybe, just maybe, they still do. Power rarely rises by accident, and the Templars' rise was like a spark that became wildfire. 9 poor nights in Jerusalem, that's how it began. No land, no fortune, no visible allies, only silence, secrecy, and a mission the world was not meant to see. Yet within a generation, they were unstoppable. Kings bowed to them. Popes granted them privileges no other order had ever known. They answered to no crown, no bishop, no law but their own. They became, in whispers, more powerful than kingdoms. How? How do 9 knights rise to command thousands? How does poverty turn to endless wealth? Unless something unseen propelled them. Perhaps it was what they unearthed beneath the Temple of Solomon. Perhaps it was the secrets whispered in silence, sealed in scrolls, hidden in symbols. Knowledge that gave them leverage, wisdom that gave them vision. For power is not only in armies or gold, it is in knowing what others do not. And maybe you've noticed this too, that in life, the ones who seem untouchable often carry something invisible. Not muscle, not coin, but certainty. A quiet knowing. The Templars carried that same aura, and the world bent around it. Their numbers swelled. Nobles sent their sons to join them. Merchants donated land and riches to earn their blessing. Even peasants believed they walked under divine protection. The Templar cross became a banner of fear and reverence, but with power came unease. Kings envied them, priests mistrusted them. The Vatican smiled, yet watched. How could an order so new, so young, hold power older than Rome itself? And yet the people loved them, because they were not only knights of war, they were bankers, builders, protectors of pilgrims, men who carried whispers of ancient covenant in their silence. By the 12th century they were everywhere, fortresses on every shore, temples in every city, ships crossing seas under their seal. The 9 sparks had become a blaze even kings could not extinguish. And perhaps this was always the plan, not conquest through armies, not dominance through fear, but ascension through secrecy, through wisdom, through silence, from 9 knights to thousands, from poverty to endless wealth, from obscurity to legend. Their rise was not only meteoric, it was inevitable, because when you guard the secrets of Solomon, the world itself moves to guard you. Treasures. The word conjures gold, jewels, crowns, but the treasures the Templars may have unearthed were far stranger. Beneath the Temple of Solomon lay chambers long forgotten, vaults sealed when Babylon came with fire, corridors whispered to contain relics so sacred their very presence could bend the fate of nations. What did the knights find there? Some say it was gold beyond measure, hidden from conquerors by desperate priests. Others whisper of vessels from the temple itself, chalices, lamps, sacred tools still humming with memory. But the most dangerous treasures were not made of metal. They were words, scrolls, maps, genealogies. The unspoken wisdom of Solomon, hidden away so the world could not corrupt it. Imagine the moment, torchlight on stone, hands brushing dust from a chest sealed for centuries, the creak of hinges not open since kings walked those halls, and inside, not riches, but revelations. Can you feel it? That shiver when you realize treasure is not what glitters, but what changes you. Maybe you felt that in your own life, the discovery that something small, something fragile, holds more power than gold ever could. The Templars knew that feeling, and once known, it could never be undone. Some legends claim they found the Holy Grail itself, not a cup of silver, but a vessel of meaning, perhaps even a lineage. Others insist they found the Ark of the Covenant, still alive with fire. Still others whisper of books from before the flood, fragments of wisdom humanity was never meant to see again. Whatever it was, the effect was undeniable. The Templars returned from Jerusalem transformed, no longer poor, no longer obscure. They carried an aura as though they had touched eternity itself. The church blessed them, yet watched them with unease. Kings welcomed them, yet envied their power. For treasures can be stolen, but wisdom cannot be taken. It can only be silenced. This is why the temple treasures remain a mystery, because to name them outright would be to unravel too much. So they live in whispers, in symbols, in legends carried across the centuries. And perhaps they still exist, not locked in a vault of stone, but in the vault of silence, carried by those who swore to guard them. Treasures that are not measured by weight, but by the secrets they conceal. So when you think of the Templars, do not imagine them as seekers of gold. Imagine them as guardians of something far more dangerous, because gold can be counted. But wisdom, once revealed, reshapes the world, and maybe that is the greatest treasure of all. Symbols speak where words cannot. The Templars mastered this truth. Their world was one of silence. Secrets too dangerous to name, vows too sacred to explain. But silence alone cannot carry knowledge, so they carved it into stone, painted it into banners, etched it into seals and coins, the language of symbols. Take the red cross on their white mantle. To the church it was a mark of piety, a sign of sacrifice. But to those who looked closer, it was more. White for purity, red for blood, the union of life and death, spirit and flesh, heaven and earth, a code of duality, of balance, all the seal of two riders on one horse. To the outsider it showed poverty, humility, but perhaps it whispered of something deeper, two natures bound as one, the seen and unseen, the outer and inner life, the brotherhood of flesh carrying the burden of spirit. Even their building spoke in this hidden tongue. Circles woven into squares, triangles pointing upward and downward, ratios that match not human design but cosmic proportion. Sacred geometry built into every wall, a silent scripture written in stone. And maybe you felt this too, walking into an old cathedral and sensing something stir within you, a harmony you can't explain, as if the building itself is alive, humming with memory. That is the power of symbols. They bypass the mind and speak directly to the soul. The Templars lived in that language. Every mark they used was layered with meaning. Every sign was both a shield and a doorway. Symbols protected them, guided them, connected them to the wisdom they guarded. The church feared words of heresy. But how do you condemn a circle? How do you silence a star, or a cross, or a ratio etched into stone? The Templars hid their knowledge in plain sight, and long after they were gone, the language remained. That is why their marks still appear in places of power, carved into forgotten chapels, etched into manuscripts, woven into traditions that call themselves by new names but carry the same flame. Because symbols endure, even when empires fall, even when books are burned, even when voices are silenced, a mark carved in stone waits patiently for the eyes that can see. And maybe that is the secret of their survival. Not that they escaped destruction entirely, but that their language did, and through it their presence lingers still. So the next time you see a cross, a circle, a star in a forgotten corner of stone, ask yourself, is it only decoration, or is it a message left in silence waiting for you? Gold was never the true prize. The Templars knew this. The alchemists of old are remembered as dreamers, men who sought to turn lead into treasure. But the deeper truth, alchemy was never about metal. It was about transformation. The lead was the self, the base, heavy, unrefined nature we all carry. The gold was the soul, shining, awakened, made whole. And this, perhaps, was the greatest secret the Templars guarded. Not how to forge wealth, but how to forge the human spirit. Imagine them in silence. Knights not only training in arms, but in discipline of the heart, learning to strip away fear, pride, desire, until only clarity remained, until only light remained. Have you ever felt that pull? That sense that you are meant to become more than you are? That life is not only survival, but transformation? Maybe you felt the fire of it, quiet, unexplainable, yet undeniable. The Templars built their lives upon that fire. Their rituals, their vows, their symbols. These were not superstition. They were tools of refinement, ways of burning away what was false until only truth remained. Some said they sought immortality, but immortality does not mean living forever. It means living rightly, living in alignment with the eternal patterns that shape the world. To live that way is to touch something death cannot take. This is the alchemy of spirit. Not changing what lies outside, but transmuting what lies within. The warrior who becomes more than flesh, the knight who becomes more than servant, the seeker who becomes more than human. And maybe this is why the church feared them, because such transformation cannot be controlled. It does not require priest or pope. It does not depend on indulgence or decree. It is a path walked within, a fire lit in silence. Picture it now, a Templar kneeling in a dim chapel, not asking for power, not begging for salvation, but surrendering to the fire within, to the alchemy of spirit. This is the treasure they carried. This is the wisdom buried deeper than gold. And though their enemies burned their bodies, though kings scattered their order, the flame of that alchemy survived. It survives in whispers, in traditions reborn under new names, in seekers who still feel the call to transform lead into gold, to turn the heaviness of life into the brilliance of spirit. And perhaps you feel it too, that you are not only meant to live, you are meant to transform, to become, to burn until only light remains. That was their true alchemy, and it is ours as well. Light cannot exist without shadow. The Templars knew this. Every symbol they carried, every vow they swore, was woven with duality, white mantle, red cross, purity and sacrifice, heaven and earth, life and death. To them, truth was never one-sided. It was balance, the meeting of opposites, the union of what seemed irreconcilable. Have you ever felt it yourself? That tension between the light you long for and the shadow you cannot escape. Maybe you've known that struggle, because we all have. The Templars built their lives on that struggle, not to deny the shadow, but to face it. 2 riders on 1 horse, that was their seal. Poverty, yes, but also a reminder, 1 body, 2 natures, the visible and the veiled, the warrior and the seeker, the man and the myth. In their chapels, light fell with precision. At dawn, shadows cut through arches, forming patterns that spoke of cycles, birth, death, rebirth. Their geometry was not decoration, It was philosophy in stone, a reminder that to walk in the light one must also know the shadow, and perhaps this is why they were feared. The church preached absolutes, good and evil, sacred and profane, God and devil, but the Templars whispered of union, that both light and shadow were part of the same truth, that God was not only in the sun, but also in the silence of night. This was dangerous, because a faith that embraces duality cannot be easily controlled. It does not fear darkness, nor worship light blindly. It seeks harmony, balance, the eternal dance. Think of their lives. Knights sworn to poverty, yet entrusted with endless wealth. Warriors drenched in blood, yet men of prayer and silence. Enemies of kings, yet counselors of kings. They lived in contradiction, and in that contradiction they found power. And maybe you feel this too, that your own life holds both light and shadow, that you are not one or the other, but both. The Templars remind us that this is not weakness, it is truth. They carried this balance in secret, not preached from pulpits, but embodied in their very being. And though their enemies called it heresy, it may have been their greatest wisdom. Because to deny shadow is to live in illusion. To embrace both shadow and light is to live whole. The Templars walked that path, and perhaps that is why their memory still lingers, because deep down we know it too. That light and shadow are not enemies, but reflections, two halves of one eternal flame. Every brotherhood has roots. The Templars were not born from nothing. They stepped into a current that had already been flowing for centuries, hidden brotherhoods, societies that whispered in silence, met in shadow, and carried truths the world was not ready to hear. Have you ever wondered why the Templars seemed to know so much so quickly? Why their symbols carried echoes of Egypt, of Babylon, of Greece? It is because they were not alone. They were heirs, inheritors of a wisdom preserved through secret lines. Picture this: mystics of the desert, guarding scrolls when empires burned, Jewish sects carrying fragments of Solomon's covenant in exile, Gnostic circles hiding teachings Rome had tried to erase, Sufi masters in the East whispering of unity and divine love, each group small, each group fragile, yet each a keeper of flame. When the Templars came to Jerusalem, they did not arrive as strangers. They found echoes of these hidden orders, and perhaps, in silence, they joined them, exchanging knowledge, blending ritual, weaving themselves into a lineage older than their name. And maybe you felt this too, that strange recognition when you encounter something new, yet it feels ancient, like remembering instead of learning. That is how these brotherhoods endured, not through conquest, but through remembrance. The Templars became part of that memory, knights on the surface, dumb, but initiates in shadow. They stood in a chain that stretched back to the mysteries of Egypt, to the star watchers of Babylon, to the architects of Solomon's temple itself. And doesn't it make sense? No order rises so fast without roots. No symbol carries such weight unless it has been carried before. The Templars' strength was not only in what they found, but in who they joined. The church saw only knights, but beneath the mantle there was a brotherhood connected to older streams. Streams Rome had tried to silence, streams that refused to die. This is why their secrets were so carefully guarded, because they were not theirs alone. They were part of something vast, ancient, unbroken, a brotherhood of memory carried across generations. And maybe it still flows, through new names, through new orders, through traditions that claim no connection, but echo the same silence, the same symbols, the same sacred flame. The Templars were not the beginning. They were a continuation, a link in a chain forged in shadow, stretching back into the mists of time, and perhaps still stretching forward into ours. Every order has rules, but the Templar code was more than regulation. It was a scripture hidden in plain sight. On the surface, their rules seemed simple: obedience, poverty, chastity, prayers at dawn, fasts on holy days, silence at meals. a life of discipline, a life stripped of excess. But beneath those rules there was meaning. Each command carried a layer unseen, a lesson for the body, yes, but also a lesson for the soul. Take poverty. To the world it meant owning nothing. To the Templar it meant detachment. The stripping away of desire, the fire that turns lead into gold. Not material poverty, but spiritual refinement, or silence. The rule that bound their tongues was not only for order, it was for secrecy, to teach restraint, to remind them that some truths cannot be spoken, only lived, and that sometimes silence itself is the loudest vow. Obedience, not to men, but to something higher. To the covenant whispered beneath the temple, to laws not written by popes or kings, but by the geometry of heaven itself. Even their prayers had double meaning, words recited in Latin, but gestures, positions, and timings aligned with patterns older than Christendom. Their rituals were masks, harmless to the outsider, holy to the initiated. Have you ever noticed how ordinary things sometimes carry deeper resonance? A word that feels heavier than it should, a gesture that seems to echo. That's how the Templars lived every rule. Each one was layered, each one a reminder, each one a doorway to the concealed. Their code made them more than soldiers. It forged them into symbols. Men who walked through fire yet carried silence. Men who lived in discipline yet burned with secret knowledge. Men whose lives were rituals in motion. The church saw obedience. The world saw poverty. But the Templars themselves saw initiation. They lived inside a rhythm the world could not hear. And that is why they endured. Because their strength was not only in what they did, but in how they did it. Every act was infused with hidden meaning, every rule a reminder that they were not like other men. They were guardians of treasure, of wisdom, of covenant. The Templar Code was never about control, it was about transformation, about shaping the night into something more than flesh, something eternal. And perhaps that is why their memory still lingers. Because deep down, we recognize it. We feel that discipline is not just denial, but awakening. That silence is not emptiness, but power. That rules, when understood, are not chains, but keys. The Templars lived by those keys, and through them they unlocked a mystery the world still chases. Blood carries memory. That was the belief at the heart of so many ancient traditions. And for the Templars, the blood of Solomon was said to be the holiest thread of all. The chronicles speak little of it, the church ignored it, but whispers never die. They claim the Templars were more than knights, that within their ranks or hidden behind their patrons flowed the blood of Solomon himself, a lineage stretching back through kings, through prophets, through the very throne where wisdom once sat like flame upon the earth. And doesn't it stir something in you? The thought that the wisdom of Solomon was not lost, but carried, not in scrolls, not in stone, but in veins. Imagine it, a hidden heir moving through the courts of Europe, a man who bore not only the name of Solomon, but the inheritance of his covenant. The Templars, bound to silence, protecting him in shadow. Guardians not just of relics, but of blood itself. And maybe you felt this longing too, that deep unspoken desire to know where you come from, to trace your roots back to something greater. We all wonder, don't we? The Templars were no different, only their roots reached into legend. Some say dynasties in France, Scotland and Ethiopia claim descent from Solomon, that royal houses were linked by marriage or by myth to the king whose wisdom shaped the world. Others whisper that the Templars themselves, through secret unions, through carefully guarded bloodlines, wove themselves into that lineage, not only guarding it, but becoming part of it. And if that were true, what would it mean? It would mean their authority was not borrowed from the church. It was inherited. Older than Rome, older than Christendom, a blood right carried through centuries of silence. No wonder the Vatican grew uneasy. No wonder kings grew fearful. For if the Templars could prove descent from Solomon, then who truly had the right to rule? the Pope, the monarch, or the heirs of the wisest king the world had ever known. This is why the Solomon lineage endures in legend, because it asks the question no one dares speak aloud. What if the Templars' power was not built only on secrets, but on blood? What if they were not merely guardians of a covenant, but its living continuation? And perhaps that is why their silence was absolute, because bloodlines cannot be erased by fire, nor broken by torture. They pass quietly, invisibly, until the world is ready to see them again. So when you hear of Solomon's wisdom, do not think only of scrolls and temples. Think of blood. Think of descendants hidden in shadow. Think of knights who may have carried not only his memory, but his very blood. Wars are remembered for land, for kings and crowns, for banners raised and walls broken, but some wars are fought for memory, for what is hidden, for what must never be spoken aloud. The Crusades, we are told, were battles for the Holy Land, pilgrims, relics, sacred soil, but beneath that surface, another war was raging, a war for knowledge. Jerusalem was not only a city, it was a vault, a library carved in stone, filled with whispers of ages older than Christendom. Whoever controlled it, controlled the memory of the world. The Templars knew this, and so did their enemies. Why else would empires pour rivers of blood into that land? Why else would kings drain their coffers to claim not only territory, but ruins? Because beneath those ruins lay more than treasure. They lay truths, and truths once uncovered can topple thrones. Have you ever felt it? That history, as we are told, feels incomplete. That great gaps remain, as if entire chapters were torn out of the book of time. That is what they were fighting over. Not the land itself, but the missing pages. The memory buried in silence. The Templars were not the only seekers. Others searched too. Sultans, priests, kings, each hoping to grasp the arcane inheritance locked in Jerusalem stones, each willing to kill for memory. And what was that knowledge? Perhaps maps leading to places thought lost, perhaps scrolls filled with names too sacred to be spoken, perhaps bloodlines linking kings of old to rulers of now. All of it was dangerous, all of it worth more than gold. The war for knowledge was not fought on battlefields alone. It was fought in chambers, in shadows, in whispered negotiations where relics were traded like coin, in secret oaths that outlived treaties and crowns. And maybe this is why the Templars rose so quickly, because they were not only soldiers of the cross, they were guardians of what they found, and possession of that memory made them powerful beyond measure. The Church preached salvation through obedience, but the Templars held another gospel, a gospel of wisdom, of hidden truth, of silence, and in the silence they grew strong. This is why empires feared them, not because of their swords, but because of their memory, because they carried truths no king could own, no pope could control. And perhaps this war never ended, perhaps it still echoes, in the secrets guarded by hidden brotherhoods, in the mysteries etched into stone and star, in the quiet suspicion that what we are told is only half the story. Wars for land end, wars for memory endure, and the Templars, guardians of silence, remain at the heart of that eternal war. Betrayal often comes not from enemies, but from those who once called you brother. The Templars had risen higher than any order before them, from 9 knights in silence to masters of wealth, guardians of kings, rulers of fortresses across continents, too high, too powerful, and power, when it grows beyond control, draws the knife. The Church had blessed them, popes had clothed them in authority, kings had begged for their coin, but soon the same voices that once praised them began to whisper, whispers of unease, whispers of envy, whispers of heresy. Why? Because the Templars no longer bowed low. They answered not to kings, but to themselves. They moved in silence, carrying secrets no priest could unlock, no crown could command. And perhaps the Vatican saw it too clearly. Their loyalty was not to Rome, but to something older, something veiled. Have you ever noticed how quickly admiration can turn to suspicion? How easily respect twists into fear? That was the fate of the Templars. The very purity of their silence became their condemnation. What they would not speak was called heresy. What they would not reveal was called blasphemy. And then came the King of France, Philip the Fair, drowning in debt to the Templars, desperate to break free from their shadow. On a Friday, the 13th day of October, he struck. Knights dragged from their beds, chains, accusations whispered into the ears of men too eager to believe. Idolatry, sorcery, devil worship. Charges meant not to reveal truth, but to stain it, to turn the world against them before the truth could rise in their defense. And the church, pressed by kings, hungry for control, did not shield its own creation. It turned. It signed the betrayal. The blessing became a curse. The mantle of holiness was stripped, and the knights who had guarded Christendom were now its enemies. Can you feel the weight of it? To give your life in service, only to be condemned by those you served. To kneel in silence, while flames rose around your brothers. To die, not for heresy, but for envy. Yet betrayal does not end a story. It transforms it. The Templars burned, their leaders tortured, their order dissolved by decree. But in the silence left behind, their legend grew. And legends cannot be chained. Perhaps that is the greatest irony. In betraying them, the Church gave them immortality. For now they live not as pawns of Rome, but as whispers, mysteries, questions that still haunt the night. The betrayal was not their end, it was their beginning. The trials were never about truth, they were about silence, about breaking men until their secrets, real or imagined, spilled into the hands of kings and priests. Dragged before inquisitors, the Templars stood accused of the unspeakable, denying Christ, spitting on the cross, kissing idols in the dark, worshipping demons cloaked as saints. But look closer. Do these sound like crimes, or do they sound like stories crafted to terrify? Accusations sharpened into weapons, designed not to reveal, but to destroy. The knights were beaten, stretched on the rack, burned with flame, starved, broken, left in silence until even the strongest could not bear it, and under such agony men confessed, not because the words were true, but because pain has a way of forcing lies from trembling lips. And yet, fragments of those confessions feel strange, don't they? Strange enough to stir unease, talk of secret rites, talk of heads worshipped in shadow, talk of oaths spoken not to pope or king, but to something older, veiled and unnamed. Were these inventions of the inquisitors, or echoes of a deeper truth twisted in the telling? Perhaps both. Perhaps the line between slander and revelation is thinner than we imagine. Have you ever noticed how the most dangerous accusations are not entirely false, but half true? A grain of reality buried in layers of distortion. That is what made the trials so powerful, because even as the Church condemned, whispers lingered. What if the Templars had uncovered something forbidden? What if the rituals the world mocked were the very key to their silence, their strength? The trials were theatre, but theatre leaves an impression. The people watched knights, once holy, once untouchable, paraded as heretics. The shock was enough to fracture faith. And the Vatican knew this. Better to brand them monsters than admit the truth that they had grown beyond control. Picture it. A dungeon lit by torchlight. A knight refusing to speak even as iron tears his flesh. Another, broken, mumbling words he does not believe, just to end the agony. And above them all, the Church writing history with ink of fire and fear. The trials ended in ashes, bodies burned, voices silenced. But silence is not the same as erasure. The world watched and remembered, and maybe you feel it too, that echo when injustice lingers. The sense that what was destroyed in body may still live in spirit. The Templars died condemned, but the questions raised by their trials were never buried. If they were guilty, guilty of what? And if innocent, then what was so feared, so powerful that men were willing to kill to hide it? The trials left us not with answers, but with shadows, and sometimes shadows tell more than light ever could. When fire consumed the Order, it did not consume their memory. The Templars were broken, yes, but they were not erased, scattered across Europe, across the seas, across the shadows of history. Their knowledge moved like smoke through cracks. You cannot burn silence, you cannot chain whispers, and you cannot destroy what has already been hidden. Some fled to Scotland, where kings offered them shelter. Others melted into Spain and Portugal, becoming the seed of new orders with new names. Still others vanished into secret brotherhoods, masons, mystics, alchemists, carrying the flame in silence. And perhaps you felt this too, that uncanny sense when traditions separated by oceans share the same symbols, the same rituals, the same pulse of hidden fire. It is because the dispersal was not an ending, it was a scattering of seeds, seeds that sprouted in many soils. Imagine a knight slipping away under cover of night. He carries no sword, no banner, only a scroll, or a sealed chest, or the memory of words too dangerous to write. He disappears into the hills, into the cloisters, into the silence of a hidden brotherhood, and there the treasure lives on. For what the church burned was not knowledge itself. It was only those who carried it openly. But the hidden carriers, the silent inheritors, they endured. Have you ever wondered why the Freemasons rose with symbols so eerily familiar? Why Rosicrucians whispered of light and transformation? Why stories of the Templars still surface in places far beyond their reach? It is because dispersal is not destruction, it is survival. The Vatican thought they had crushed the serpent, but what they struck was only one head. The body writhed, divided, multiplied. The knowledge slipped through their grasp, flowing into streams that fed secret societies for centuries to come. And maybe that's why their memory feels alive even now, because it never rested in books alone. It was carried in lives, in vows, in the quiet discipline of men who chose silence over betrayal, who chose to vanish rather than confess, who chose to plant the treasure rather than see it burned. The dispersal was the beginning of the legend, because when truth is scattered, it travels farther. It seeps into places it might never have reached if left whole, and the Templar flame, instead of dying, spread. Perhaps that's why their symbols still linger in our world, on stones, on seals, in whispers, because somewhere those seeds grew, and perhaps they still grow. The Order was destroyed, but the knowledge simply moved into the shadows, waiting, watching, alive. Stones remember. Even when men fall, even when orders are broken, the stones carry their whispers forward. And in those whispers, the Templars lived on. The Freemasons rose centuries after the flames consumed the Order. Builders, architects, craftsmen sworn to secrecy. But look closer. Their symbols are not merely of stone and compass. They are echoes. Echoes of Solomon's temple. Echoes of the Templar code. Have you noticed it? The square and the compass mirroring the sacred geometry once traced in Jerusalem. The letter of light at the center. The ritual tools not for building walls alone, but for building souls. Does it not feel familiar? It should, because the Masons, whether they claimed it or not, walked the path the Templars had once walked. They inherited more than craft. They inherited the silence, the discipline, the hidden language written in stone. Perhaps it was no accident. Templars who escaped the pyres found shelter among Masons. Knights without swords became brothers with chisels. And in those guilds their secrets could breathe again. But this was no mere survival, it was transformation. The sword became the compass, the fortress became the lodge. The oath of the knight became the oath of the builder, and in this way Solomon's wisdom was reborn. Have you ever felt the weight of a cathedral's silence? The way its arches draw your eyes upward as if to remind you of heaven? That is the Templar legacy passed into Masonry. A geometry that does not simply house prayer, but becomes prayer itself. The Church feared the Templars because their truths could not be contained, but in Masonry those truths became hidden again, sealed in allegory, protected by ritual, shared only through initiation, safe from kings, safe from popes, safe even from history itself. And maybe this is why the Masons still feel mysterious today, because somewhere within their symbols, their rites, their silence, echoes the heartbeat of the Templars, and behind the Templars echoes the wisdom of Solomon. Lineage is not always blood. Sometimes it is symbol, sometimes it is oath, sometimes it is stone. The legacy in Masonry proves what betrayal could not erase. That wisdom buried in silence will always find a new vessel, that no flame can destroy a truth once carved into the fabric of the world. So when you see the compass, the square, the all-seeing eye, ask yourself, are you looking at Masonry, or are you gazing into the mirror of something far older, far more dangerous, and far more sacred? Because perhaps the Masons did not simply inherit Solomon's secrets, perhaps they were chosen to keep them. Threads fray, cloth tears, but some strands never break. The Templars should have vanished, burned by kings, condemned by popes, buried in the ash of history, and yet, here they are, not in armies, not in fortresses, but in whispers. Have you noticed it? How their name still stirs something deep within us, a shiver of mystery, a pull of recognition, as if the story never truly ended. Legends of hidden treasure, tales of knights who escaped across seas, rumours of secret orders who still gather in silence. All of it may sound like myth, and yet myths only survive when something inside them is true. Maybe you felt this yourself. That strange sense that some knowledge refuses to die. It moves quietly like water beneath stone. It slips through time, unseen but unbroken. That is the Templar thread. For though their order was scattered, their essence endured, in symbols carved above cathedral doors, in rituals disguised as prayer, in bloodlines whispered through royal houses, in stones aligned to stars where no builder should have known the pattern. The Church declared them erased, but silence can be louder than proclamation. Every attempt to bury them only deepened the fascination, and fascination is a form of survival, because memory does not live only in books, it lives in hearts, in the questions we carry, in the unease we feel when history seems too clean, too edited, too complete. The Templars live in that unease, in the space between what we are told and what we sense to be true, and perhaps that is why their story lingers, because deep down we know truth cannot be destroyed, it only hides. Think of it like a flame shielded by cupped hands. The wind may rage, but the flame survives. And when the hands open again, the light returns. The unbroken thread is not in fortresses or crowns. It is in silence, in symbols, in whispers passed from one seeker to the next, unseen, unrecorded, but alive. And maybe you are part of that thread now, by listening, by wondering, by questioning what was erased and what endures. The Templars did not vanish, they transformed. They sank into shadow and became a story, and stories once lit cannot be extinguished. Some say the Templars are gone, burned, broken, erased, but history has a way of leaving doors half open, and silence often speaks louder than fire. Are the guardians of Solomon's secrets truly lost, or have they simply stepped into shadow? Look around. Symbols etched into cathedrals no one can explain, rituals whispered in lodges behind locked doors, bloodlines that claim descent from kings no chronicle dares confirm. Is this coincidence, or is it survival? Perhaps the eternal guardians are not knights in armor anymore. Perhaps they are seekers, builders, dreamers, perhaps even listeners like you, souls who feel the pull of mysteries others have forgotten. Maybe you felt it yourself, that quiet stirring when you walk beneath ancient stone, the sense that someone long before you left a message there, not for kings, not for popes, but for those who would listen, for those who would remember. If that's true, then the order was never destroyed. It simply changed form. It slipped into silence. It hid in whispers, waiting for moments like this. And here we are, you and I. Speaking of secrets the world tried to bury, holding open a door most have forgotten. Do you feel it? That sense that the story is not finished, that perhaps the eternal guardians are not a legend at all, but a presence still moving, still guiding, still protecting something sacred. The truth may never be written plainly, but maybe it isn't meant to be. Maybe it is meant to be felt, passed not by parchment but by spirit, a thread of memory woven through time, reaching those ready to see. And now, it reaches you. If this journey has stirred something in you, if these whispers feel alive, then you are part of it now. This is how the flame survives, one listener at a time, one seeker who refuses to let silence become oblivion. So ask yourself, are the guardians gone, or are they here in the questions you now carry, in the hunger for truth that lives in your heart? Perhaps you are closer to them than you realize. And if you wish to walk further on this path with me, then stay. There are more secrets to uncover, more forgotten pages to lift from the dust. We will walk through them together, step by step, candle by candle. If this story has moved you, share it. If the questions burn in you, speak them. If you want to keep walking deeper, subscribe. And you will never walk this path alone. Like, comment, share, because that is how the silence breaks. That is how hidden truths find new guardians. And maybe one of those guardians is you. The flame has not gone out. It never will, because you are here. And that means the eternal guardians still walk among us. The story doesn't end here. Every question you carry, every whisper that lingers in your mind, is part of a greater journey. And if this awakens something in you, don't let it fade into silence. Watch more of our videos, walk deeper with us into the shadows of history. Share your thoughts below. Your voice keeps the flame alive. Like, share and subscribe so you never miss the next hidden truth waiting to be uncovered. Because this isn't just a channel, it's a circle of seekers. A place where the forgotten is remembered, where silence becomes story, and where you are not alone. Stay with us. The flame is still burning, and maybe, just maybe, it's calling to you.